When we talk about narcissists, it's crucial to understand that their sense of control is not just a preference. It is the very scaffold that holds up their fragile identity. Unlike most people who can tolerate uncertainty and ambiguity, a narcissist's world is built on the illusion that everything can be managed, manipulated, and predicted. They invest enormous energy into shaping not only external circumstances, but also the perceptions of those around them. To them, life is less an unfolding mystery and more a carefully staged performance in which they are always supposed to be the lead actor, always appearing flawless, always in command. But this illusion of control is inherently brittle because it is founded not on genuine competence, insight, or connection with reality, but on manipulation, deception, and coercion. When their carefully laid plans, whether subtle emotional manipulations or overt attempts to dominate others, begin to fail, the narcissist does not merely feel frustration. They experience a profound existential alarm. Their entire worldview, which depends on control and predictability, starts to collapse. What we often see at this stage is not merely disappointment, but panic, a visceral, almost primal reaction to the realization that the world cannot, in fact, be bent entirely to their will. This panic is not random. It arises because narcissists are deeply dependent on external validation to maintain their internal equilibrium. Their sense of self is not stable. It is porous, leaky, and contingent upon others' compliance with their narrative. When that compliance falters, when a target resists, when a plan backfires, when a lie is uncovered, the narcissist is confronted with a terrifying void, the emptiness at the core of their identity. This void, which they have meticulously hidden behind charisma, charm, and control, becomes alarmingly visible, even to themselves. And in that moment, the illusion of omnipotence crumbles. Interestingly, the panic we witness is often disguised. Outwardly, a narcissist may attempt to reassert authority, to rationalize the failure, or to scapegoat others. Yet beneath the surface, there is a profound internal disorientation. Their usual scripts, the rehearsed strategies that once guaranteed success, no longer suffice. They feel unmoored, exposed, and, most frighteningly, powerless. This is why a narcissist in panic mode can appear erratic, impulsive, or even self-destructive. The behavior is less about strategy and more about an instinctive attempt to survive the collapse of their self-constructed world. From a psychological perspective, this moment illuminates a deeper truth about human fragility. We often equate confidence and dominance with strength, but what we see here is that so-called strength can be entirely contingent on illusion. The narcissist's panic is a dramatic demonstration that when identity is externalized and control is overvalued, the slightest disruption can feel catastrophic. This is not only a cautionary tale for those who interact with narcissists, but also an invitation for self-reflection. It challenges us to consider the ways in which our own sense of control and self-worth may be dependent on outcomes outside of our control. The philosophical dimension is equally striking. A narcissist's life is a testament to the human compulsion to master uncertainty. Yet, in the very act of trying to control everything, they create a world in which failure is intolerable and vulnerability is unthinkable. Their panic, therefore, is not merely a failure of strategy. It is a confrontation with reality itself, a reality that refuses to conform to their narrative. And it is in this confrontation that we, as observers, can recognize a fundamental irony. The more a person attempts to dominate life externally, the more fragile their internal life becomes. Ultimately, understanding this dynamic equips us with clarity. When a narcissist panics, it is not simply emotional drama. It is a window into the architecture of their inner world. Recognizing this allows us to witness their unraveling without fear, without entanglement, and without the need to rescue or fix them. Their collapse is a mirror, reflecting the limits of control, the necessity of self-awareness, and the enduring human challenge of confronting uncertainty with humility. So, as we consider the illusion of control and the panic that follows its failure, let us remember this. True power is not the ability to manipulate or dominate, but the capacity to remain grounded when the world refuses to bend to our will. The narcissist may panic, but we, who observe with clarity and presence, have the opportunity to respond with calm, awareness, and unshakable self-possession. That is the profound lesson hidden in the chaos of a narcissist. In panic, when a narcissist's manipulation fails, the collapse is not merely logistical, it is deeply emotional, almost visceral. Unlike most people, whose emotional responses are proportional to circumstances, a narcissist's feelings are intimately tied to their sense of control and self-image. When the plan they meticulously constructed begins to unravel, the emotions that emerge are intense, volatile, and often overwhelming. Rage, confusion, and desperation are not merely reactions, they are a reflection of the profound instability that lies at the core of their being. Rage is often the first and most visible symptom. It is not always targeted directly at the person who disrupted their plan. Sometimes it erupts indiscriminately, directed at anyone in proximity or at themselves. This anger is fueled by a combination of shame and frustration. The narcissist is confronted with the undeniable truth that their careful orchestration has failed. And in that failure, they see the fragility of the persona they have worked so hard to maintain. Their rage is, in essence, a defense mechanism, a way to externalize the pain of exposure, to reclaim some semblance of authority in a world that suddenly feels uncontrollable. Alongside rage, confusion emerges. A narcissist is accustomed to predictability, to the illusion that their strategies will produce predictable outcomes. When those outcomes fail to materialize, it triggers disorientation. Their usual mental scripts, ways of thinking, explaining, and manipulating no longer apply. The world becomes uncertain, unpredictable, and, from their perspective, chaotic. This confusion can appear as indecision, impulsivity, or contradictory behavior. One moment, they may attempt reconciliation or rationalization. The next, they lash out or withdraw entirely. This oscillation is not random. It is the manifestation of a mind struggling to reconcile expectation with reality. Strategy with failure follows closely behind, and it is the most telling of their emotional responses. The narcissist's sense of self is fragile and dependent on external validation. When their manipulation fails, they are confronted not only with a practical setback, but with an existential threat. The emotional core of a narcissist cannot sustain itself without recognition, compliance, or admiration from others. When these are denied, when the target resists, or when the plan collapses entirely, the narcissist feels a profound sense of powerlessness. This desperation drives frantic efforts to regain control, whether through renewed manipulation, pleading, intimidation, or sudden, irrational decision-making. It is important to understand that these emotional responses are not signs of maturity or conscious choice. They are reflexive, almost primal. They reveal the internal architecture of the narcissist's psyche, a structure built on control, external validation, and the suppression of vulnerability. The intensity of their emotional fallout reflects how precarious that structure truly is. From a psychological perspective, this is an opportunity to observe the costs of over-reliance on control and manipulation as a coping mechanism. The more a person externalizes their sense of worth and authority, the more catastrophic the emotional consequences when those mechanisms fail. Philosophically, the narcissist's emotional storm teaches us about the nature of attachment and identity. Their attachment is not to people in the authentic sense, but to perceptions, outcomes, and the reinforcement of their self-image. When these attachments are severed or challenged, the reaction is disproportionate because the perceived threat is not merely to circumstance, it is to existence itself, at least as they define it. This is why, when observing a narcissist in the throes of failure, one sees not just anger or confusion, but a deep, almost childlike panic, a terror at the exposure of emptiness that lies beneath the grandiose mask. For those of us witnessing this, the lesson is profound. Recognizing the emotional fallout allows us to maintain perspective, to see past the surface drama to the underlying dynamics. It encourages detachment, not indifference, awareness, not reactivity, understanding that rage, confusion, and desperation are reflections of internal fragility rather than rational intent, helps us avoid being drawn into the chaos. It reminds us that the narcissist's emotional turbulence is theirs to manage, not ours to absorb. Ultimately, The emotional fallout of a narcissist's failure is a mirror, reflecting what happens when identity is contingent on control and validation. Their intense, often erratic feelings reveal the limits of externally dependent selfhood and the cost of building one's existence on manipulation rather than authenticity. Observing these patterns equips us with insight and clarity, enabling us to navigate interactions with awareness, calm, and strategic presence. So, as we watch the storm of rage, confusion, and desperation unfold, let us remember this: the power lies not in responding to their chaos, but in holding steady in our own. Their emotions may be turbulent, but our clarity can be unshakable. By witnessing without absorbing, we not only protect ourselves, but also reclaim the space and peace that manipulation seeks to unsettle. When we examine the dynamics between a narcissist and an empath, we begin to see why manipulations that seem invincible on paper so often collapse in practice. Narcissists rely on others' emotional reactions to reinforce their illusions of control, yet empaths operate differently. An empath experiences life through sensitivity and awareness, attuned not only to their own feelings but to the subtleties of others. States as well, this heightened perception allows the empathy to detect the manipulative currents that a narcissist assumes are invisible, and it is precisely this awareness that becomes the disruptor of the narcissist's carefully orchestrated reality. Empaths do not respond reflexively to coercion or intimidation. Where a narcissist expects fear, submission, or compliance, the empath may respond with measured presence and clarity. They do not need to assert power or dominate in order to maintain equilibrium. Instead, they model resilience through detachment and observation. This creates a paradox for the narcissist. Their usual levers of control, guilt, shame, provocation, or gaslighting, become ineffective because the empath's center of gravity is internal rather than external. Their strength is not in manipulation, but an unwavering attunement to reality and emotional integrity. When a narcissist attempts to manipulate, they are counting on two factors: that the other person will react predictably, and that the emotional terrain can be shaped to their advantage. The empath undermines both assumptions by recognizing the manipulation as it arises, by not giving in to impulsive reactions, and by maintaining clear emotional boundaries. The empath renders the narcissist's influence ineffective. The strategies that once produced predictable outcomes, fear, confusion, or compliance, fail to operate. And it is in this failure that the narcissist begins to experience the disorienting panic we discussed earlier. Their assumption of control is shattered because the empath refuses to supply the emotional validation that sustains their illusion of power. From a psychological perspective, this dynamic highlights a critical truth. Control is never absolute, and emotional manipulation relies on the compliance of others. A narcissist cannot manipulate someone who has a strong internal compass and an awareness of their own boundaries. The empath's presence exposes the illusion of control as precisely what it is: a fragile construct dependent on submission rather than reality. The empath becomes a mirror, reflecting back not just the narcissist's behavior, but the underlying insecurity and fear that drives it. This reflection is often unbearable for the narcissist because it forces them to confront what they have long hidden: their dependence on external validation and the emptiness beneath their projected self. Philosophically, there is a profound lesson here about human interdependence and the ethics of awareness. The empath does not confront the narcissist in order to punish or dominate. Rather, they maintain integrity in the face of distortion. Their power is subtle but formidable. It lies in consistency, presence, and self-possession. In a world where manipulation often thrives, the empath models an alternative mode of being, one where connection is genuine, boundaries are respected, and influence is earned through authenticity rather than coercion. The empath's role is not to engage in a battle of wills, but to remain rooted in their own truth, allowing the narcissist's deception to unravel naturally. It is also essential to recognize the courage this requires. Empaths are often socialized to prioritize others' emotions above their own, to appease or mediate. Yet in these encounters, they must assert themselves with clarity, refusing to absorb toxic influence. This is not a form of aggression, but a disciplined exercise of awareness, knowing when to engage, when to detach, and when to let the narcissist's chaos unfold without intervention. Their calm presence becomes a stabilizing force, not only for themselves, but as a silent catalyst that exposes the limitations of the narcissist's manipulative schemes. Ultimately, the empath's role, illuminates a broader truth about human interaction. Manipulation thrives in darkness, in confusion, and in unawareness. Awareness, presence, and integrity are powerful antidotes even when exercised quietly and without fanfare. The empath does not need to attack, confront, or change the narcissist. They simply need to maintain clarity and boundaries. In doing so, they reveal the inherent fragility of manipulation and the inevitability of its collapse when confronted with consciousness. So, as we reflect on this dynamic, let us remember, true strength is not the ability to dominate or control, but the capacity to remain present, aware, and grounded in one's own truth. The empath's calm, unshakable awareness is the mirror in which the narcissist's illusions dissolve. And in that dissolution lies a profound reminder: integrity and clarity are far more potent than manipulation, for they cannot be undone, swayed, or diminished. When a narcissist's plan collapses, one of the most revealing aspects of their response is the instinct to shift responsibility. Projection and blame are not mere habits or social habits, they are survival mechanisms. At their core, narcissists are profoundly fragile. Their sense of self is precarious, constructed on a foundation of external validation and careful self-presentation. When their illusions are threatened, they are confronted not only with failure, but with a perception of personal inadequacy, and their reflexive strategy is to externalize the blame. Projection is, in psychological terms, a defense mechanism. It allows the narcissist to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves by attributing them to others. If they failed in their manipulation, it cannot, in their perception, be due to their own miscalculation, lack of empathy, or poor judgment. No, the fault must lie elsewhere, often with the very people they sought to control. By projecting blame outward, they can preserve the fragile image of competence and omnipotence that they cling to so desperately. This is not simply defensiveness, it is a psychological imperative. To admit fault would be to confront the emptiness that underlies their grandiosity, and such confrontation is intolerable for them. Blame serves a dual purpose. On one level, it is a shield, a way to deflect attention from their vulnerability. On another level, it is a weapon designed to destabilize the target and reassert control. The narcissist's accusations, complaints, or distortions are carefully constructed to make the other person question themselves, to create doubt, confusion, or guilt. But here, the paradox becomes clear. The more they attempt to project, the more their own instability is revealed. Their insistence on attributing responsibility elsewhere is an admission, albeit unconscious, that the failure lies within them. They cannot endure the reality of their own inadequacy, so they manufacture narratives where others are responsible for the very breakdown they themselves caused. This mechanism also explains why narcissists often seem blind to evidence. Even when presented with facts that contradict their version of reality, they resist, rationalize, or twist the truth. Projection is not a choice, but a psychological shield. Admitting reality would require facing the void at their core, the emptiness and fragility that they have spent a lifetime covering with charisma, control, and manipulation. They are not simply dishonest, they are defending their very sense of self from collapse. From a philosophical standpoint, this exposes a fundamental truth about human consciousness and accountability. Projection demonstrates what happens when self-awareness is lacking, or when the ego becomes so rigid that reality is subordinated to self-preservation. It reminds that accountability is not simply a social nicety, but a profound practice of honesty with oneself. The narcissist's inability to own their part in failure illuminates the cost of avoiding internal reflection. It traps them in a cycle of blame, isolation, and escalating instability. For the observer, the empath, the colleague, the friend, the pattern becomes instructive. Recognizing projection allows one to maintain perspective, to differentiate between what is the narcissist's burden and what is one's own. The narcissist will attempt to pull others into their self-preserving narrative, but clarity and boundaries can prevent this. We can see the projection for what it is, a reflection of inner fragility, not a commentary on reality. Understanding this helps us avoid becoming entangled in their attempts to manipulate or distort our perception of ourselves. Moreover, observing projection and blame teaches a subtle yet profound lesson about resilience. A narcissist's world is governed by illusions of control. Their panic and subsequent blame reveal the instability of these illusions. In contrast, when we cultivate self-awareness, honesty, and accountability, we build a sense of self that is resilient, capable of holding truth, without crumbling under the weight of failure. The more a person is willing to face their own imperfections, the less susceptible they become to fear, defensiveness, or irrational blame. Ultimately, projection and blame illuminate not just the mechanics of narcissistic behavior, but the architecture of human psychology itself. They reveal how fragility manifests externally, how fear and shame can warp perception, and how the refusal to confront one's inner truth perpetuates cycles of chaos and suffering. By observing this behavior without judgment or attachment, we gain insight into the interplay between vulnerability, self-deception, and emotional regulation. So, as we witness the narcissist shifting blame and projecting responsibility, let us remember this. The true measure of strength is not the ability to manipulate others or deflect fault, but the courage to confront one's own reality and endure the discomfort of imperfection. In their frantic attempts to preserve an illusion, the narcissist shows us, paradoxically, the power and serenity that come from owning our truth. That is a lesson we can carry into every interaction and every choice we make. When a narcissist's carefully orchestrated plan unravels, something remarkable and revealing occurs. The mask begins to crumble. Throughout their lives, narcissists construct a persona designed to impress, control, and protect. This mask is a sophisticated performance, blending charm, confidence, and authority. It is not simply an image projected to the outside world. It is a defense, a barrier between their vulnerable inner self and the gaze of others. For a time, this mask can be remarkably effective, convincing even those closest to them that their power and self-assuredness are authentic. Yet, the mask is not made of solid material. It is an illusion, a thin veneer supported by manipulation, projection, and constant reinforcement. When their manipulation fails, the mask can no longer hold. The breakdown of the mask is often sudden and dramatic. The narcissist may display behaviors that seem uncharacteristic: panic, impulsivity, visible fear, or even self-directed aggression. These behaviors are not anomalies. They are the cracks through which we glimpse the fragile interior that the mask was designed to conceal. Beneath the surface of grandiosity and control lies a person terrified of exposure, a self that has long relied on deception and external validation to feel whole. What we witness in these moments is a profound incongruence between the persona and the person. The careful choreography of confidence gives way to the raw, unfiltered reality of insecurity, shame, and helplessness. Psychologically, this is illuminating. Narcissists expend enormous energy maintaining the illusion of invulnerability. Their social interactions, strategic manipulations, and even subtle body language are calibrated to reinforce the perception of power and perfection. But when their plans collapse, the illusion is no longer tenable. The behaviors they have relied upon to sustain the mask, intimidation, flattery, coercion, fail to elicit the expected outcomes. Their projected control dissipates, and the mask begins to warp, revealing the void underneath. It is a stark reminder that the persona they inhabit is not synonymous with the self. The more a person invests in a facade, the more destabilized they become when that facade is challenged. The breakdown of the mask also reveals a profound truth about human identity and vulnerability. We often think of narcissists as strong, dominant, or unshakable, but these assumptions are predicated on the mask itself. Once it falters, we see that the apparent strength was conditional, contingent upon the compliance and reactions of others. The narcissist's vulnerability is not a flaw in the ordinary sense. It is the inevitable consequence of constructing a life around deception and external validation. This is why, in panic mode, even small challenges or resistance can provoke intense emotional reactions. The mask was never real, and the underlying self is unprepared to exist without it. Philosophically, the collapse of the mask invites reflection on the human tendency to conflate image with identity. Many of us, to varying degrees, rely on external markers, success, appearance, social approval, to define ourselves. The narcissist simply embodies this tendency to an extreme degree. Observing the breakdown of their mask is a cautionary lesson. A life constructed solely on appearances is inherently fragile. True resilience, by contrast, comes from cultivating an internal locus of self-worth, a sense of being that does not depend entirely on the perceptions or compliance of others. For the observer, particularly an empath or someone attuned to psychological dynamics, this is a pivotal moment. The breakdown of the mask signals an opportunity to witness truth without entanglement. We see the dissonance between performance and reality, between projected authority and internal fragility. It is not an invitation to gloat or to exploit, but an occasion to understand the profound costs of living inauthentically. The narcissist's mask is a dramatic display of what happens when identity is externalized, when validation is demanded, and when vulnerability is feared. Ultimately, the collapse of the mask teaches a universal lesson. No amount of performance, manipulation, or deception can fully replace the work of authentic self-awareness. The narcissist's panic and exposure demonstrate the limits of illusion and the inevitability of truth. For us, it is a reminder that resilience and clarity are built not through dominance or control, but through honesty, self-reflection, and the courage to exist as we truly are, even in the face of uncertainty or failure. So, as we witness the mask cracking and the persona faltering, let us remember this. The power of authenticity outlasts the performance of pretense. The narcissist may panic, rage, or attempt to reassemble the facade, but the lesson is clear. Real strength lies not in masking our fragility, but in embracing it. And in that embrace, we find freedom, clarity, and the unshakable foundation upon which true human resilience is built. As we have traced the unraveling of a narcissist's manipulation, the panic, the emotional turmoil, the projection, and the collapse of the carefully constructed mask, we arrive at a crucial perspective: the lessons for the observer. It is one thing to witness the chaos, but quite another to engage with it wisely. For those who encounter narcissistic behavior, particularly empaths or those sensitive to the emotional currents of others, understanding these dynamics is not just informative, it is transformative. The observer, by recognizing patterns, detaching without disengaging, and cultivating personal resilience, can navigate these interactions without succumbing to confusion, guilt, or manipulation. Recognition is the first step. To recognize is not merely to label the behavior as narcissistic or manipulative. It is to perceive the underlying mechanisms at work. Rage, confusion, desperation, projection, and the collapse of the mask are all signals. They are manifestations of internal fragility, not accurate reflections of reality or personal failure. The observer must learn to see beyond the surface drama, to discern that the panic and aggression are rooted in insecurity, fear, and dependence on external validation. Recognition allows clarity. The narcissist's behavior is less about us and more about the dissonance in their own identity. When we comprehend this, we no longer take their actions personally, and we are freed from the emotional entanglement that often sustains their control. Detachment is the second, equally vital step. Detachment does not mean emotional coldness or indifference. It is a disciplined awareness that separates one's own emotional reality from the narcissist's projections. By maintaining boundaries, observers create a psychological buffer, protecting their sense of self while still remaining empathetic and conscious. This detachment is a form of empowerment. It allows us to witness the narcissist's unraveling way without being drawn into reactive patterns of fear, guilt, or overcompensation. Detachment is a declaration of autonomy, a statement that our inner life is not hostage to another's chaos. It is through this calm, grounded presence that manipulation loses its power, but recognition and detachment alone, are not sufficient. Thriving is the final, perhaps most transformative element. To thrive is to use the lessons of these encounters to cultivate personal growth, resilience, and self-possession. We learn from the narcissist's panic not to fear uncertainty, to maintain clarity in the face of chaos, and to value authenticity over performance. We observe what happens when identity depends on control, and we see the consequences of neglecting self-awareness and accountability. In essence, thriving means internalizing the wisdom of observation, developing a selfhood robust enough to withstand manipulation, aware enough to act consciously, and compassionate enough to understand the human frailty behind destructive behaviors. Philosophically, this approach reframes the encounter with narcissism as an opportunity rather than a threat. The narcissist, in their panic and unraveling, inadvertently provides a mirror. They reveal what happens when life is governed by external validation, control, and avoidance of vulnerability. By observing without entanglement, we learn not only how to protect ourselves, but how to cultivate qualities they lack: self-awareness, integrity, and groundedness. The observer's clarity becomes both shield and compass, guiding interactions with awareness and discernment. From a practical standpoint, thriving also requires active cultivation of boundaries and support structures. Recognition and detachment are not passive states. They are practices. They involve setting limits on emotional availability, resisting engagement with manipulative tactics, and seeking the counsel or community of those who support clarity and self-possession. These practices reinforce the observer's resilience and prevent the subtle erosion of confidence that narcissistic chaos can produce. In this sense, thriving is a continuous, conscious effort, a commitment to self-preservation, self-knowledge, and growth. Ultimately, the lessons for the observer converge on a profound truth. Real power lies not in manipulation or domination, but in self-awareness, presence, and grounded autonomy. We do not need to control the narcissist, argue with them, or dismantle their defenses. Instead, we cultivate a capacity to recognize their patterns, detach from their turbulence, and thrive in our own lives. In doing so, we not only protect ourselves, but we model an alternative mode of being, one rooted in integrity, clarity, and resilience. So, as we conclude this exploration, let us hold this insight. The collapse of a narcissist's manipulation is not merely a spectacle of chaos, but a profound teaching. It reminds us that clarity, presence, and authenticity are far more enduring than control, deception, or fear. By recognizing, detaching, and thriving, we reclaim our own authority over our lives, and we transform what could have been a source of disruption into a source of empowerment, wisdom, and profound self-understanding. The narcissist may panic, rage, and collapse, but we have the choice to stand steady, unshaken, and fully alive. As we reflect on the unraveling of a narcissist's manipulation, from the shattering of their illusion of control, through the storm of rage, confusion, and desperation, to the exposure of their projections and the collapse of the mask, we begin to see a pattern. All of it stems from the fragility of a self built on external validation, rather than internal integrity. What they panic over, what they rage against, is not reality itself, but the exposure of the gaps, insecurities, and vulnerabilities they have spent a lifetime concealing. For the observer, the lessons are profound. Recognition allows us to see their behavior for what it truly is, without distortion or fear. Detachment gives us the space to maintain clarity, protecting our emotional boundaries while witnessing the truth. And thriving reminds us that our own strength comes not from domination, manipulation, or control, but from awareness, authenticity, and grounded resilience. The narcissist's collapse is dramatic, even terrifying, but it is also illuminating. It shows us the consequences of living through deception and control. And by contrast, it highlights the enduring power of self-knowledge and integrity. Their panic, their projections, and their unraveling are mirrors, revealing what happens when life is built on appearances rather than presence, on fear rather than understanding. Ultimately, the message is clear. We cannot control the chaos of others, nor should we try, but we can cultivate our own clarity, maintain our presence, and live with integrity. In doing so, we are not only protected from manipulation, but we create a life that is resilient, authentic, and deeply grounded. The narcissist may panic, rage, or collapse, but we have the choice to remain steady, unshakable, and fully ourselves. So carry this truth with you. Real power is not in controlling others. It is in mastering yourself, observing without being ensnared, and thriving despite the turbulence around you. That is the ultimate lesson that a narcissist, in panic mode, no matter how chaotic, can teach us.